In our first update of the Beauty Retouch panel, we've renewed a few scripts and added a couple of new useful functions, as well as a couple of brush presets for your dodge and burn work. My personal recent retouching experiments heavily influenced how we've configured these brush settings. I hope you will find these innovations as helpful as I find them, and before you get down to retouching with the updated panel, I'd like to share with you how I came to these brush settings and why. Recently, I've had a few conversations with fellow photographers and retouchers regarding their brush work preferences, and just for the sake of experiment, I decided to change my own ways to see how another approach to handle brushes feels when dodging and burning, and if it may help render better retouching results. I personally came into the world of retouching from digital painting and drawing, and as a result, lifting up my brush or my stylus at the end of each brush stroke was always normal for me, which meant that there was no difference as to what setting will control the intensity of my brushwork, opacity or flow. So I've always been using opacity, leaving flow at 100%. I've never really tried to change the way my hand applies brushstrokes, but following the conversations with other artists, I decided to challenge myself and see what happens. So let me demonstrate how I became comfortable with the new, for me, way of using brushes, and I hope this will help you to take another look at your own habits and hopefully help you to dodge and burn better. I've also created a simple dodge and burn practice file for you to train your eye/hand/brain connection for better retouching, and I will show you how to work with it in this video as well. With the default Wacom stylus settings and pressure for opacity and size settings turned on in Photoshop, our brush strokes very much depend on pen pressure. This is wonderful and gives additional control on the fly to digital painters and those who have been working with a tablet for many years, but not so helpful for someone who is not as comfortable working with pen pressure. We should be able to turn off pressure sensitivity for opacity in the options menu right here. Let's see. Well, it looks like nothing's changed. That's because transfer setting in the brush palette is still checked and it acts as if the button is still on. So let's turn it off. Okay, that worked. Now our pen pressure is only affecting the size of the brush stroke. Let's turn it off in the option menu as well. Same story, nothing's changed. It's the shape dynamics setting that you need to uncheck to turn off pen pressure for brush size completely. Okay, perfect. Now our brush stroke does not depend on how much pressure we put on the stylus, and the size of the brush is consistent and is exactly what we expect it to be. Let's now see what the airbrush setting does. The airbrush setting allows you to build up color by increasing the time that you hold and press your brush tip on one same area. When both opacity and flow are at 100%, the airbrush setting will not do anything to a hard-edged brush, but with a soft brush, the color will continue coming out and the edge of the brush will continue spreading outside of the visible outline of the brush. If I lower the flow, for example, to 40% and then press and hold without moving the stylus, the color will continue to come out and build up to its maximum, which is 100% opacity. It will be more noticeable if I set flow to 10%. If I just touch, it's 10%. If I press and hold, it continues to let the color out until it's 100% again. Now if I change the opacity to 10% and flow back to 100% and press and hold, the paint only comes out to 10% and that's our maximum now. So the opacity value caps the amount of paint that can come out in one single brush stroke. Here's a single brush stroke with opacity capped at 10% and flow 100%. I don't lift up the pan at any point while painting this. Now if I do lift up the pan and continue brushing over the same area, then I will be able to build up color and add 10% more on top of it each time I lift up the pan and paint over again. Let's try the opposite, 10% flow and 100% opacity. As you can see, a lot more color is coming out at 10% flow, and I can also build it up to 100% without lifting up the pan by brushing over the same area. We still have our airbrush setting on, so let's see the difference. I turn it off and now it doesn't build up color by touch, only if I continue brushing over it, due to the low flow setting. And with the airbrush setting on, it builds up again. Let's now see how these settings affect the soft brush. With the airbrush setting off, I have to brush over the same area to build up color, just the same, and with the airbrush on, I can just press and hold. At 100% flow, the rate at which the paint is coming out is much higher, but look at the spill of the color outside of the outline of the brush. Let me show you again with a larger brush. See how the color now spills way over the visible outline of the brush. This actually can be a problem when you're selecting your brush size to match the blemishes that you're working on when you're dodging and burning, and you may not even be aware of it. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine we have a dark patch to dodge. Typically, we select the size of the brush to match the size of the patch or blemish, especially when performing local dodging and burning. Now, with the airbrush and pressure sensitivity settings on, you think you're applying a certain amount of color limited by the outlines of the selected brush, but in reality, your brush lets out just a little bit more or a little bit less paint than you expect, and that paint overlaps with the areas that you don't mean to affect or doesn't cover the areas that you actually want to affect. In this demo, I'm slowly painting to cover the lines and stopping and changing pen pressure along the way. The aftermath of working with the settings is the difference between what I meant to do and what my pressure-sensitive airbrush actually applied. The red color here is the extra color that spilled over the edge of my brush strokes. Bottom line, if you haven't mastered working with pressure sensitivity and the airbrush settings, just be mindful of what these settings actually do to your brush work. And if you choose to work with the what you see is what you get size of the brush, then turn off pressure sensitivity and the airbrush settings. Now let's check out how we can control the brush color output most accurately with various flow and opacity combinations. Soft brush stroke at 100 opacity and flow. Same brush at 10% opacity and full flow. Same brush at 10% flow and full opacity. 10% flow lets out a little more color, but with this setting we can build it up to 100% without lifting the pen, which we cannot do with the opposite setting of 10% opacity and 100% flow. Only if we lift the pen up at the end of each brush stroke to add more paint until we reach 100%. Okay, that's clear now. Let's see what will happen if we also lower the opacity setting while our flow setting is already at 10%. We can build up the color, but only until it hits the selected opacity value. So this is perfect for when we need a really gentle color application. The low flow percentage will allow us slowly build up the color, and the opacity percentage will actually cap the amount of paint that can come out in a single brush stroke. So now, with all of this in mind, we decided to add our own brush presets to the updated Beauty Retouch panel package, which we think will work best for dodging and burning. Considering the curve settings and the adjustment layers in our dodge and burn scripts, our brush presets are at 1% flow and 100% opacity, with pen pressure and airbrush settings turned off. In most cases, you will be able to build up color by brushing over the area until you have brightened or darkened it enough. And sometimes, when even at 1% flow, the changes are too drastic, lower the opacity by pressing number keys on your keyboard or with your cursor, and it will lower the intensity of your brush strokes. These little changes in settings alone should slightly increase your speed and add some accuracy to your retouching work. So in the updated Beauty Retouch panel, you will find a couple of new brush buttons with little dots on them. The one that sits right next to the local dodge and burn button will trigger the brush preset that is 10 pixels in size, 1% flow, and 100% opacity. And the one that is neighboring the global dodge and burn button has the same flow and opacity settings, just larger in size for your sculpting and contouring work. And the old brush button will work just as before, triggering a simple brush with no specific settings. Now here's the dodge and burn practice file that you can download from your membership area on our website. You can actually practice your hand-eye and brain connection and work on mastering the dodge and burn technique with any type of brushes that you prefer. The new presets are just an additional instrument that we added to the updated panel because we believe that they may make your dodging and burning work more convenient and results more accurate. So watch this time-lapsed video of me evening out the areas of different values using our dodge and burn script and the new brush preset. Then go ahead and register on the Retouch Academy Lab website if you're not a member yet and download this practice file. Enjoy and happy retouching!